I came back to Jersey after the pandemic. I had just finished my MSW program at the University of Southern California, and things kind of went downhill. You know, I hit a little bump. Job availability wasn't there. You know, housing wasn't there. Transportation wasn't there, and so I made the brave decision to come back home to New Jersey. You know, it tends to be hard when wanting to do that, but I came back home, came back with my mom, and I was able to start to rebuild, you know, my life and to figure out what direction I really want to go in. And so it was my birthday weekend. Okay, I just turned 20. I'm 29 now. Yeah, just turned 28. And my former teacher, right, and advisor for our youth diversity group during high school, she was Alicia DiLorenzo. At the time, she was deputy director here at Garden State Equality in about 2021. Yeah, it's 2023 right now. So 2021, and she hit me up on Facebook, and she was just like, I have a job opportunity for you. Would you want to be a project manager for Garden State Equality? Right? And I was just like, I mean, sure. I'm like, why not? You know, I'm like, so I applied. And when I say it completely turned my life around, where I was able to, one, find community within Asbury Park, within Long Branch, within Monmouth County, because I never really had that. Like, I had that when I was in Los Angeles. I had my queer community, and coming to New Jersey, being gone for 6 years, everything's changed. Friendships aren't really the same, and personalities aren't the same. And so Garden State Equality gave me a family. It gave me identity, gave me familiarity, and gave me the branch to actually, you know, explore my own sexuality and my gender identity, you know, in a very safe space. And to be able to share my story with other folks within the community has been really great, and to give that representation. So, yeah, that's how I made it to Garden State Equality. But if we want to know how we got into doing the work that we're doing, it started in high school. Through the youth diversity programming that I was doing. And then also within that, I went to a change makers camp, something similar to what we do, you know, just put that in there. And that's when I came out. I was just like, I am bisexual. I am an individual who likes women and not only men. And through that work I did through high school, it just exploded, right? It exploded to me being able to say, I'm an advocate. I'm going to do this, because if I don't speak up, then who else is going to speak up for the community, especially within the Black community and being queer? Sometimes it's a no-no, but we see that around all different populations and cultural and religious identities. And so doing that work during high school, during college, you know, and then even in undergraduate school, kept doing it. And particularly with this episode, what we're doing today, I was a foster youth myself. And outside of, you know, living that experience, we can definitely get into that maybe a little bit later on, when we're going in and giving a lot of tips and things of that nature about experience and caring for LGBTQ plus youth, and just youth in general who are within the foster care system. And that's my mission and my goal. You know, I was just like, I want to eradicate certain things within the foster care system, you know, shed light to the disparities and the treatment that some foster youth experience. And I don't want that. So that's why we're here today, to share these tips, to share these experiences, and to get a little down and dirty and open up some minds and change lenses. The first thing I want to say, and it's something that is easier said than done, is having to love yourself, right? So loving yourself can be very hard when there's a lot of outside, you know, triggers and facilitators that make you feel as though you are less than and you're not worthy to actually be who you are. And so tips that I can share for me and what I did was, you know, having to accept that, you know, I'm queer, you know, I am queer, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And so being able to accept that you identify as queer, identify as transgender or non-binary, any identity under the spectrum, that comes with having to do research, right? And so what that research looks like is going online, and sometimes you like to say online is scary, this and that, but being someone who is part of a marginalized community. Sometimes our only outlet is to go online and to find those communities. And for me, during my time, it was Tumblr. I don't know if Tumblr is still a thing. I hope that it is, because it's a really great avenue to express yourself as openly as possible without too much, without judgment, right? And so finding those communities, right? So whether it's a chat room, or maybe it's an actual Facebook group, of LGBTQ plus youth within your community. And one thing I can say that I really love with technology and individuals who are looking for that space are creating those spaces with pure intent. And so when you're going in and trying to find these common rooms, right? Always be mindful, make sure you do your due diligence and make sure it's an actual safe space, right? If it's a private group, the better, because you tend to have to answer questions and that can be scary, but that is you taking the first step in being to say, I am okay with who I am, and let me find community that will also be okay with who I am, and I can explore this and ask those questions and maybe find somebody who's even in the same town as you, right? And that happened for me too. I was able to find people, maybe just a town over, who were part of the queer community, and I would chit chat with them, and we would hang out, we would talk about the latest things, the latest YouTube series that were out about the queer community, which is also a good tip that you can do as well, right? Because we need to see that visibility. We need to be able to see that there are other folks who look like us, love like us, and live like us. And going on and watching YouTube series, that's amazing. That helped me, where I was just like, okay, this is great. There's queers, they're Black, they're lesbian, they're stud, they're mass presenting, they're feminine. There's just so many different variations of queerdom that I was able to see, which was able to help me settle in and find a little bit stability too as well. And another thing that I want to give is to, find, if you have a supportive person within your life, find that person and be okay to be vulnerable with them. If this is a person who you've talked about other things with, right, and you feel that sense of safety with them, go ahead and communicate with them, because you're going to need that supportive system. And sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not, but I would say 9 times out of 10 it's there. It can even be your librarian, because my librarian knew who I was, and I would go in and I would find every single piece of teen literature that she would put in there, and I would have conversations with her, and she would ask me about myself. And so when you can find that supportive person, whether it's family or not family, lean into that, because they're going to be your greatest person. This is a really great topic and conversation, and something, we talk about a lot at Garden State Equality through our workshops and community workshops, and understanding the LGBTQ plus community and culture, right? And so some things that we can do right off bat, before we can even get to acceptance, we need to get to the point of unlearning historical messaging that is very traumatizing and ostracizes the LGBTQ plus community, right? And so some ways in which we can go about and learning that history, what we're going to have to do is listen to the community within, right? So that means the same as having to find self-acceptance, you're going to have to go out within the community, listen to them, be around them within their environments, and have conversations, genuine conversations, and be okay to ask questions, but asking those questions that are respectable. And some ways in which you can do, I'll say this, ways in which you can formulate a good question without being offensive, right, is to start it off with, look, I don't understand everything, but from what I've experienced, this is what I see, whatever that experience may be, right? And so within that line of questioning, or statement, you are allowing space to be educated, right? So when you allow yourself to be educated, that means that okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to change my mindset and to be a little bit more vulnerable and understanding of a community or a culture that's not like mine, right? And sometimes we do it, and we do it within, foreign countries, right? We love to travel, we love to speak foreign languages and learn those. And do we ever question ourselves or ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Or asking them, why do they have certain pronouns for this, or why do they speak in this way, or why do they act in this way, right? We just boil it down to, well, that's their culture and we have to respect that. So when you start to reframe and change mindsets and bring everyday things in that you typically don't question, you start to ask yourself, like, well, why am I questioning this? Is it based off of my religion? Is it based off of my culture? Or is it based off of maybe negative experiences I've had? And that's where you start, right, with that acceptance as well. You go in, you invest yourself into the LGBTQ plus community, whether that can be a support group, right? There's multiple agencies and organizations that host support groups for parents, whether you're a biological, foster, resource parent, or maybe you are, a kin guardian. So you have the access to this, but you have to be willing to do it, right? And it might be scary, right? Just click it. If it's virtual, perfectly fine. You don't got to show your face. You don't got to be on the mic. You can just be there and listen and process what you're listening and process what you're feeling in a space that's private, but also communal, right? And then you also have that chance to type in a little bit of something, right? Maybe a personal message because you might be scared. So these are some avenues that you can really take in being able to accept an individual, a youth, a child that you love, or you're on the pathway of loving and providing a safe space for, is to legit open up that mind, be okay, be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. And one thing that I would like to end us off with, for all parents and guardians, is to don't rush them to fill in the blanks. Sometimes we get really excited. We have this anxious because we're just, I don't know what's going on. Like, are you this? Are you that? Are you going to start doing this? Because we're hearing and repeating what we've been seeing through social media in our environment. But this is the time to just slow down and ask them about themselves and be open and be patient, because it's a very new explorative thing for them as well it is for you. So we have to be mindful, patient, and above all, loving. So I'll keep this a little brief, but we'll focus on three aspects of healthy relationships in pertaining to our LGBTQ plus youth, right? And so the importance of a healthy relationship, one, builds resiliency. Throughout our lives, we are faced with a lot of difficulties, whether it's personal, whether it's familial, or whether it's environmental, right? And if we don't have that healthy relationship or stable, ability or relationship within ourselves, it kind of gets hard for us to figure out what are those next steps, right? We kind of start to miss out on the ability to problem solve and to fix certain problems in our lives, because with problem solving, we kind of need a little bit of direction, right? We kind of need folks to challenge us or to give us advice or give us alternatives, and different roadmaps to what our mind is thinking that we see as something that's just so struggling, like we just cannot get over it. And especially for an LGBTQ plus youth, with everything that is happening currently with the LGBT legislation and anti-trans legislation, it's starting to get very political, right? So political control over the body, this is something that they're going to have to be facing continuously. And hopefully we would like to, sooner than later, abolish some of this legislation that's happening, but there's going to be a continuation of struggle and just the inability to sometimes move forward. And so when you have that healthy relationship that is secure, you are able to give them something that they actually need. They need that backbone, and they need to be able to problem solve and to figure out, how can I get through this knowing that I'm an okay person, that I'm great, and I have a loving, supportive community behind me. So building that resiliency. And so going into number two, that would be to, it improves self-worth. When you have somebody who is on your team and is loving you and giving you those affirmations, giving you all of the credit that you deserve as a human being, right? And saying that there is nothing wrong with you, that changes their whole perspective of who they are and how they see themselves, right? We have to be able to look in the mirror on a daily basis and say, you are strong, you are beautiful, you are kind, you are courageous, and whatever it may be. But where does that stem from? You know, that's something that some of us can build up, but for the most part, it was delivered by somebody else. And so you being that strong founded person, giving them affirmations, leads them to understand that they are important and they can continue to be contributing citizens to, you know, their environment and to heal other peoples along their journey. And then finally, something that I want to talk about is stability. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but that stability is necessary, right? So you're walking with no roots connected. When you're walking around and you're living a life where you feel completely displaced and there's no steady ground, there's always going to be the concept of you feeling like you are sinking. And sometimes, some of y'all have heard, you know, either you sink or swim, right? And there's an in between. Sometimes you can float. And sometimes within the LGBTQ plus community, a lot of us tend to float, not really knowing where to go, you know, just letting, you know, the motions take us, right? And sometimes that can be very dangerous, even worse than sinking, right? Because sometimes there's a, you know what happens when you sink, right? And so when you have those healthy relationships and you're building that with an LGBTQ plus youth, it ties back into all of this. All of it is intersectional and it's intertwined. That stable foundation for them gives them a whole life of living. And that's what I want to say. You, child, will live. Rejection looks many ways, it feels many ways, but when we talk about that fear, right? And I was looking at something on TikTok. I'm a TikTok person, and it talked about the concept of individuals getting to success, right? And typically, getting to success, you have to cross that boundary of fear. You have to tackle that, you have to feel it, and you have to understand it, right? But sometimes, and as I mentioned before, because LGBTQ plus folks are just being bombarded by hate and legislative power, there is a lot of fear in the community to actually live authentically. And for a lot of us, adults, and for me, when I was younger, being queer wasn't the best thing. A lot of folks, you know, thought it was a phase. They were just like, oh, you're just doing this to get attention. So there's a lot of outlash that's negative within, you know, folks at even at an early age coming out, right, where it's just completely disbelief. The way in which I have conquered that fear was through years of building my community, finding people, talking to people, and being okay, and also sharing those stories, right? Some of us like to call it trauma bonding, but I like to reframe that to talking about how we are two individuals who have experienced pain in our lives, and let's talk about that and let's heal together from that, right? So when that fear is there, that's one option, right? And if we don't have that option for the most part, that fear translates into us self-isolating. That turns into angry outbursts, right? Because there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of security, there's a lack of stability and feeling safe. So a lot of those behaviors are more so protective. These are adaptive behaviors that come out of being fearful of living your truth. And it's saddening. It's saddening for sure, for sure. However, I see it uprising now even more from my time, because I get jealous of the kids now where I'm just like, y'all just living y'all best life. Y'all are free. Y'all not scared. But in reality, they actually are scared. And when I'm having one-on-one conversations with them, it is completely disheartening, and a lot of them choosing to live in fear and to live in a world where they can't truly be themselves because they feel as though this is the only way in which I can survive. And when we start getting into that point where fear turns into survival, that leads us down a road that is not necessarily beneficial for us, and especially LGBTQ plus youth. And that's when disassociation starts to happen as well. During my time in foster care, there was a lot. I'll start this. I did not like the system. I didn't trust the system, and I wish that, I had a better experience. But for me, I was one of those who was a high number. I was like maybe a 9, close to a 10, where I would get bounced from one house to the next house, right? And the reason why I would bounce from one house to the next is because it wasn't supportive and it wasn't stable. They made me feel as though I didn't know anything. First and foremost, before I can even tap into my own identity, an identity was already given to me that, I didn't know anything. I wasn't capable of caring for myself or being able to complete tasks. And I also was, even deemed as, a pathological liar. And as one of those instances of living in fear, going into a new environment, being taken away and separated from the only family that you know, there is that adaptation, that guard of wanting to feel safe because I don't know you, I don't trust you, and you have not been giving me love or respect or giving me the opportunity to prove to you who I actually am. And it was about, and I discovered my sexuality very early on. I was still in foster care, and this was when I was with my godmother, and I had an experience with a young lady, and I was just like, oh my goodness. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I was just like, I think I like you. I was just like, I don't want to not be around you. I was like, I want to be with you all day, every day, and all of this stuff. And I was just like, I don't get it. I was like, I don't understand what's going on, right? But I couldn't even address that or talk about that because I had to be a good kid. I had to make sure that I'm good and nothing goes wrong, nothing on my report, and I don't have to get switched to another house again. So, on top of being within the foster care system, there's a lot of other things that happen before your identity can even be discovered. And if you don't have that healthy relationship or those folks coming in and loving you completely for who you are, you won't even get to that chance. And I wasn't able to get to that chance, so I sat on it for a very long time, and I assumed the identity of heterosexual. And I know now there's a lot of individuals within the queer community who are, have the mannerisms, I'll say that, have feminine mannerisms or masculine mannerisms where, they're not passing. Me personally, I'm a person who passes within the community, and I struggle with that. And there's other individuals who don't pass, especially even now at a younger age. And so right off a bat, it's just like, I don't know how they're going to handle me. I don't know if they're going to be okay with this. And something I love to tell foster parents and anyone who is in guardianship, right, is that LGBTQ plus folks, because there's such a adaptive wall of living in survival, we can clock y'all. We are able to see your facial mannerisms, your body mannerisms, and that gives us a key of if you're a safe person or if you're not a safe person. And so if you start to see, your child, start to disassociate or is a little bit angry, or maybe quote unquote disrespectful, doesn't want to listen, can't complete tasks, or might be seeing some depressive episodes, right? This is a chance for you to sit down with self and be like, I'm not too sure what's going on. I want them to be great, but you wanting them to be great, you have to kind of put on the back burner. Because the first thing that you need to do is to answer the question, are they okay? Are they all right? And if that answer is no, based off of the behavior that you're seeing and the behavior that is not necessarily typical, you know, ask those questions. Maybe even ask the social worker and be like, do you have any idea of what's going on? Or maybe have a mediation and be like, you know, this is what I'm experiencing. Because a lot of times within my experience as well, I was bombarded with questions and already assumed to have done something bad. A lot of folks do not have the right, well, not the right, they don't have the opportunity to tell their story within the system. And so that's something we need to do as well. Make sure that you're asking those questions and giving space so that that fear can be explored. Acceptance, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And how does that actually manifest in a day-to-day life, right? And what that looks like, what that feels like, is knowing that we have individuals who are true allies. A lot of times, especially now within this movement of, you know, I guess LGBT, you know, Q plus being a buzzword or trendy, and there's a lot of attacks, and there's a lot of people wanting to be like, yeah, I'm LGBTQ plus friendly, I affirm, I'm loving, right? But that's, you can't just check the box. And for most times we see folks are just checking those boxes to get either, you know, their own form of affirmation to make themselves feel better, right? And to say like, I am inclusive because I did X, Y, and Z. You may have done X, Y, and Z publicly, but privately, if you're not practicing the same thing that you are publicly, it falls short and it doesn't really mean anything to us, right? And so when you are practicing allyship privately, what that looks like is you stepping in front of someone who identifies as LGBT. If they're being heckled on the street or if they're being harassed, that means that you are stopping in your tracks, making sure if they're okay, and defending them in public to whomever the aggressor may be. So that's one aspect. And all of us may not be in that part of feeling comfortable enough to speak out, but that's something that we have to start doing as a collective of humans. You know, we have to no longer be that bystander and watch something happen, because reporting it doesn't really help, right? Because there's still no action being had. So there's a day-to-day where we see our lives being played and we're seeing this abuse, and we're not seeing the people. We're not seeing people show up. We're not seeing people, you know, pull us to the side, give us a hug, ask us if we're okay. And when we do have parents, you know, who are practicing that privately, it's amazing, because when we leave out in the world and then when we come home and we have a safe place to be, that makes the world a difference, right? Nobody wants to come home and the home don't feel like a home. So practicing that allyship in private quarters is also very important. And I'll even share a little bit of my own personal experience. And so my mom is gay too as well, or bisexual, I don't know. But she's part of the queer community. And very funny enough, as I'm speaking about, you know, this as an advocate, as a person with lived experience and part of the community, it was very hard for me to accept. My mom came out first. And it was hard for me. I was in my counselor's office crying. I was like, my mom came out as gay and I don't know what to do, because at that time I was still trying to live a heteronormative life because I was living in fear. And so her coming out led me to a year later to come out, but I did my own process, right? I had to get comfortable with who I am, because that was projection that I was using on her and not being able to accept it fully for my experience. And so when I came out, my mom was just like, is this my fault? Are you gay because I'm gay? And I was just like, no, girl. I was like, no, no. And it was very dramatic. Like, I sent out a text and everything. My sister was just like, I was just waiting on you. And I was like, okay, I didn't know that. My stepmom was just like, oh, I knew too. And I was just like, so everybody around here knew I was gay and nobody wanted to tell me anything. But that would be a great example to start and have those conversations and to ask about that, which lets us know that you're okay with the concept of us being queer, and you have no ill motive or narrative about it, which would definitely help. And so my mom wasn't able to grasp it. She thought it was her fault. But what we did, we actually went to PFLAG. We went to I got her in there. I was just like, you got to know your sexuality as best as me having to know my sexuality. And within that, she was able to come to terms with her sexual identity, and I was able to come to terms, and we were able to love each other and to see each other, and I was able to get that support from my mom. And it took some steps. My story is, I don't know if it's a common one, but it's an interesting one that shows truth and validity, and how even if you are part of the community, you tend to have some issues as well, because it turns into self-hatred when you allow yourself to not live your truth, and you take in everything that the community is saying, about the community, and how it's not great and it's a negative narrative. And so having that relationship with my mother was really great, and my stepmom kind of knowing already, and then my sister knowing as well, it made me feel whole. And I was just like, I can be me. I was like, I can be gay and all of this stuff, and no one will be upset with me, and I'm all right. And that's what really mattered, was that my home was safe and sound, even though I was still dealing with adversity on the outside of it. So having that acceptance just gives so much relief, and it saves lives, and suicidal ideation and attempts lower. They lower immensely. And it's amazing when we can save more lives than not.